Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving straight into Fort Sumter and the 34-hour spark that ignited the Civil War. Think about this for a second. How does a virtually bloodless siege manage to trigger the absolute bloodiest conflict the United States has ever seen? It's a massive puzzle of political brinkmanship, miscalculation, and the exact moment a deeply divided nation finally just shattered. Let's get right into it.
So here is the core mystery we're unraveling today. How on earth did a battle with exactly 0 combat casualties start the American Civil War? To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at a bombardment that quite literally reduced a masonry fort to rubble, but didn't kill a single Federal soldier in combat. And yet, somehow, this practically miraculous survival rate guaranteed 4 years of unimaginable destruction.
Let's set the scene. By April of 1861, Charleston Harbor had basically become a giant powder keg, just waiting for a match. On one side, you've got South Carolina, the very first state to secede. They're looking at this federal installation sitting right in their territory as a massive insult to their brand new sovereignty. But for the North, voluntarily abandoning that seawall was just entirely unthinkable. So we're at a complete tense standoff. Enter President Abraham Lincoln, who is playing a brilliant, albeit intense, game of calculated brinkmanship. Faced with an impossible choice, he sends a relief expedition to supply Major Robert Anderson's starving Federal troops inside the fort. But, and this is absolutely crucial, he gives strict orders to use force only if fired upon first. Lincoln was completely determined that if a war was going to start, the South was going to have to take the total responsibility for firing the first shot.
And man, the ticking clock to war moved blindingly fast from there. On April 10th, Confederate authorities hand over a strict ultimatum to surrender. Major Anderson, even though he knows his men are out of food, flat out refuses. Now the Confederates are sweating because they know that Northern relief convoys arriving on April 11th. They realize they just can't wait any longer. The tension finally snaps.
Fast forward to exactly 4:30 in the morning on April 12th. The silence of Charleston Harbor is totally shattered. The very first shot is fired by Edmund Ruffin, who is the 67-year-old fiery Virginia secessionist. And he didn't see this as a tragic descent into war. He actually called it a shot of honor. That single pull of a lanyard was the spark that officially ignited the American Civil War.
I mean, just imagine the sheer shock of that moment. That very first shell from Ruffin's cannon crashes into the wall literally 2 feet above the head of the Federal second-in-command, Abner Doubleday, jolting him awake. But the crazy thing is, the Federal response was delayed by 2 whole hours. They were completely outgunned. They lacked mortars, they had no fuses for their cannons, so they basically just had to sit there and watch the Confederate bombardment aggressively build in intensity. What followed was a relentless 34-hour siege. For a day and a half, Confederate batteries just mercilessly pounded the Federal installation. It was this overwhelming, deafening display of firepower designed to force an immediate surrender.
To put the sheer terror of this assault into perspective, let's look at one staggering number: 600. There were over 600 direct hits on Fort Sumter. We're talking massive artillery shells rapidly turning solid masonry into absolute rubble. The volume of explosives raining down on these guys in an enclosed space was destructive beyond anything they had likely ever experienced.
But okay, here is the grand contradiction of the entire event. 0. Despite 34 hours of relentless pounding and 600 direct hits crumbling the walls around them, exactly 0 Federal soldiers were killed or even seriously hurt during the combat itself. Honestly, it's a miraculous statistic when you consider the terrifying scale of the attack.
Actually, the very first casualty of the war wasn't even a Union soldier. It was a Confederate gunner named Daniel Howe. And the tragic irony here is that he didn't die from enemy fire. He died when his own cannon went off prematurely simply because the barrel hadn't been properly swabbed out between shots. It's a pretty stark reminder of just how chaotic and dangerous 19th century artillery was.
So let's look at the aftermath. Realizing his guys are completely surrounded and out of supplies in a ruined fort, Major Anderson surrenders on April 13th. The very next day, on the 14th, he and his men are officially permitted to evacuate, and they proudly carry their tattered Union flag right out with them.
But history absolutely loves a better twist. The ultimate tragedy of Fort Sumter is that the singular Federal death associated with the entire engagement happened purely by accident. It happened after the fighting was totally over, during a 100-gun celebratory salute to the flag before their evacuation. A cannon accidentally exploded, killing 1 Union gunner. So the only Federal life lost at Fort Sumter was claimed by a ceremonial misfire.
Now, even though the battle itself was practically bloodless, the political fallout was absolutely explosive. It set off this massive domino effect. Step 1, President Lincoln immediately calls for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. Step 2, that specific call to arms forces the hand of the remaining divided states. And Step 3, the political crisis officially plunges the nation headfirst into total war.
Looking closer at those dominoes, Lincoln's demand for troops is exactly what pushed the states of the Upper South, specifically Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, to officially and immediately join the Confederacy. The lines in the sand were now firmly, irrevocably drawn. The map of the conflict was set.
At the time, men across both the North and the South were racing to join the military ranks, fueled by this immense wave of patriotic fervor. The expectation was a short, sharp conflict, just a quick skirmish to settle things, right? They were completely unaware that this initial enthusiasm was going to plunge them into a grim reality of 4 years of unprecedented carnage.
For everyone living through this incredibly rapid escalation, going from a tense political standoff to a blazing 34-hour artillery siege in the blink of an eye, the drums of war were now beating loudly. Life as they knew it in the United States was permanently altered. The innocence of the era was just gone, replaced by a nation turning its guns on itself.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a profound question. How often in history does a single, practically bloodless spark guarantee years of total, unavoidable destruction? It's a haunting reminder of how quickly political brinkmanship can spiral out of control. Sometimes, the loudest explosions really do begin with the quietest miscalculations. Keep that in mind.